Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem of my Blitz game number 321. My opponent started off with knight f3. I have the black pieces here. You can see actually knight f3, if we back up, knight f3 is the third choice after e4 and d4, even ahead of c4 in popularity. Of course, it's a very flexible move and it can transpose into many different openings. What we get is a traditional queen's pawn opening after I play knight f6, which is the main response, since white hasn't disclosed what his plan is. Black doesn't want to give anything away either. Just wait to see how white intends to continue to play. So with d4, white is just going into an ordinary queen's pawn opening. He can play more interestingly with g3, trying to get into a reti, or c4 will be just an English opening. b3, I don't think I've seen that. That would be interesting looking line. Knight here and a pawn there. I guess it's with the idea of going after the dark squares because the knight already controls these, so yeah, it might be interesting. But anyway, in this game, d4 was played, d5, and we get just an ordinary queen's pawn game where my opponent plays the very rare move, b4. So we're out of the opening book right there. But it's interesting. It's an interesting move. It clamps down on on my idea of playing c5, which is what I normally play in a queen's pawn game. So it's a way to get your opponent out of his normal patterns, I guess. Now the engine doesn't approve of this particular opening, and it thinks I should play bishop f5 or bishop g4. So developing this bishop to this square or this square. I guess, yeah, I ended up playing e6, which blocks the bishop in, and I got into kind of a passive position after a while. So that was maybe my first mistake in this game, was blocking in that bishop. I could just play c6 as well, setting up a normal kind of Slav defense, and that would keep this bishop open. So either way, those would probably be better ways to play than what I did. I played e6, and my opponent played a3. Of course, e6 threatened the pawn, so it sort of came with a tempo, but I guess this a3 move might have been part of my opponent's plan anyway. Let's back up a second. Was there an alternative to a3? No, a3 is the move there. So still with some advantage to black, and now I continue developing with bishop d7. But you see whatever edge black had due to the unusual openings slowly diminishes, and after a few moves it's pretty much an equal game. But so far so good. And we're just getting our pieces out, and I'm still puzzling over what to do about this c5 square. Maybe, b6 and c5 is a way to play this. But my opponent preempts these thoughts that I was having by playing c4 immediately, and you'll see that c4 is actually an equalizing move. So, it even starts to like white's position after c4. So maybe I should have. I didn't realize this c4 was an idea in this position. Maybe I should have done something about it. So what's the engine recommending? b6. Yeah, b6 to prepare c5. Okay. Anyway, white gets in this move c4, and I take it. I don't want to get a completely closed position. I want to have some open lines, so have some activity for my pieces. And now white can continue with e4 and grab the center. So white's got pretty good interesting play here. He doesn't have to recapture the pawn immediately because this pawn is not going to be so easy to defend. I guess, well, let's take a look at this. If he played e4, and I tried to hold on to the pawn with knight, I could play knight b6 or maybe b5 here. Knight b6 doesn't hold on to the pawn because it's already under attack by two pieces. So and then he can push on. Oh yeah, so this doesn't work at all. So e5 is justified tactically. So in other words, he doesn't have to round up this pawn right away. e4, e5. e4 comes with the threat of e5, and it gives him time to round up the pawn under better circumstances. But anyway, he just took back, and I dropped my piece, my bishop back to e7. I didn't want to trade it off. And he played e3. So very solid setup, and white's got the advantage. So somehow, even though we played a kind of wacky move in the opening, didn't really backfire in this case. But this is, not a huge opening advantage. It's a typical kind of opening advantage. So the game continues on. I play b6. He plays b5. This may be a mistake, but once again, he's trying to clamp down on my activity here, and it has some effect. But I was able to kind of wriggle out of this one. He develops his bishop. So we're almost through the stage of completing our development. He goes rook c1. Let's see. The computer didn't like rook c1 so much. Oh, it thinks I should play a6 immediately. Yeah, I thought of the a6 idea in a little bit. I was thinking I could get in this pawn push directly to c5, but with this pawn here taking en passant, it didn't look that attractive. So so I started with c6, and then he played a4. Actually, I have to question my thinking. You know, if I was worried about him taking en passant, then playing c6 isn't any help because he can still take it. So I guess what I wanted to do with c6 is actually threaten to take his pawn, and that forces him to defend, and then I pushed on with c5. So still okay for both sides. He castles. So now development has been completed. The rooks have been positioned. The minor pieces are out. The kings have castled, and we have a little bit of activity here. I start with taking, and I fully expected him to take back with a piece. It's interesting that he chose to go for the isolated queen's pawn position. It's not a particularly great setup for an isolated queen's pawn because his bishop, which is defending the pawn, is just not very active here, and I can pretty easily stop this pawn from advancing with knight d5. But still an even position. So rook e1, continuing our development. The other knight goes to f6. Let's see, did I have a better move there? Bishop to b4. Yeah, I had spotted this during the game. I just wasn't sure it accomplished a whole lot. Committing the bishop on this side of the board when I might want to bring it out on this side at some point. But it does, of course, hit the rook, so it gains a tempo and forces the rook back, or forces actually the engine is suggesting knight fd2, forces a knight back, so it creates a pin. Anyway, I didn't do that. I played the knight up. He goes queen b3 and knight e4. So knight e4 is a mistake, and I realized later this knight, you know, sort of wandering around over here, getting into trouble. But this is a position where I was having trouble finding moves. It starts around here. So it looks like knight f4 was the way to play this. This other knight comes in here. Okay. Opens up this diagonal for the bishop. It hits his bishop and threatens to trade it off. This is a good piece in this setup because it's not obscured by any central pawn. So if I can get rid of his bishop, that's quite an accomplishment. So after knight f4, bishop f1, and then I can bring my queen to d5. Very unusual to use your queen to blockade the pawn. Okay, so that's the computer plan. Knight e4. He brings his knight in. This is a great square for him to drop his knight into on c6 there, and I can't really prevent that. I traded rooks here, and then tried to bring my knight around to a more effective square. Well, I really wanted to challenge his knight and enhance the power of this bishop on this diagonal, thinking, well, maybe I can use this, move this knight with tempo at some point. But he drops his knight right into c6, and you know, I felt like I couldn't let it stand there, so I took it. And yeah, b takes c6. I was expecting him to take back with a pawn. If he can maintain the pawn on c6, that'd be very strong for white. He took back with the rook. And I went queen d7, hoping to swing my rook over and just trade this guy off. And now this is good. Good for white. He's got knight e5 coming in here with tempo, kicking my queen around, and then he plays h4, kicking my bishop. He should continue with the bishop to d3 or f3. That's interesting. Or bishop g4 maybe. That's starting to like bishop g4 now. Just getting a more active post for his bishop. I'm not sure if there's a tactical idea there. I'm going to, yeah, probably play something to f6. I was thinking bishop to f6 to try and trade off this knight, but maybe bringing my knight to f6 is a computer suggestion. Anyway, he went with h4, kicking my knight. And fortunately, I thought maybe he should have set up something like bishop to d3, because then h4 is a threat and my knight has no squares to go to. Look at all the squares that the knight might go to or would be covered, and so h4 would trap the knight. So I thought bishop d3 would be a pretty good threat. Yeah, the engine thinks that's a good second choice, and then I have to play f6 to give my knight an escape square. Okay, but sorry, he kicked immediately with h4, and I retreated. I moved my knight to the only square available, and now he goes bishop f3 attacking it. So that was not a good move. What's the way to follow up? Bishop g4 is a way to follow up. Okay, so after bishop f3, I can play knight d2. Yeah, I missed this. Knight d2 is an interesting move. Of course, it forks the queen and the bishop, but mainly it's about getting rid of this strong bishop. So if I can trade off one of my knights for his good bishop, that would leave me with an advantage. So I missed that idea, and I just retreated my knight. And now, once again, I'm in a bit of trouble here. g4, he's expanding on the king side, and I can't find any way to get my pieces active. I end up trading off, and well, the engine thinks it's about even, but I'm wanting to win this game. And it's just a challenge to find a way to activate my pieces. Here, he helped me out a little bit by taking the knight. But look at how restricted my pieces are. The queen has trouble finding squares to go to. It needs to defend the a-pawn. The knights are defending each other, but they're not looking at a lot of squares towards the king. This is mostly a defensive setup. So I really have a very passive setup here, and I'm trying to break out of it. So he helps me out by, my opponent helps me out by exchanging off some pieces. When I've got the cramped position and he has the space, the side with the space doesn't want the trades. He wants to keep his pieces and try and take advantage of the awkward placement of my pieces. Okay, so this trade helps me. And then he plays queen f3. Coming over here, looking at my f7 pawn. And I go bishop f6, blocking the queen and maybe trying to get some pressure against the d-pawn. And now he goes bishop to a3, taking away squares from my queen. I mean, I was trying to get my queen into the game here too somehow. So I start with a6. First of all, I have to get rid of the a-pawn so that the queen isn't tied down defending it. He went bishop back to c1. So it seems like he was having a little trouble finding a plan here. And now bishop takes d4 is possible right here. Oh, that's a neat trick. Bishop takes d4. And if he takes with the knight, I grab the bishop. So he just momentarily placed the bishop in a bad square, and I could have taken advantage of that. That's a very cute tactic. Okay, I missed that. I took over here. I was still worrying about freeing my queen. I didn't want to leave the a-pawn hanging. And here, I can still take on d4. But anyway, I'm trying to activate my queen, and he just goes back to a3 with his bishop. And my queen just has no good squares. Look at how all these squares are covered by his pieces. This whole diagonal is covered, so I have nowhere to go except back. So I went to c7. He brings his king up, and now I reposition my queen to d7. I realize, well, maybe I can move the knight. If I can't find a way for the queen to move, I can move the knight around. He plays queen g3, and finally knight c7 is a strong move because it's threatening to take this pawn, and he really needs to do that. He needs to do something about that. The engine is suggesting queen b3, which would come over here and not there. Come over here to b3 and defend the b pawn, so that if I take, he takes back, defending everything. So he didn't notice the threat or ignored it and played queen f4, still trying to get something going against my king, and then this move just wins because it's a double attack. I removed the pawn, which was defending this knight, so the knight is loose, but it also attacked the bishop at the same time, and there's no way to avoid losing a piece. So he does get a check in, but that's nowhere near enough compensation. He gets to pick up a pawn, but I get to pick up a bishop. And now I just have to be careful not to lose my scattered pieces, but my bishop is well defended here. The queen can take care of itself. It's just this knight that's a little bit loose, and I have to be careful bringing it back that I don't lose it to a fork or something. He goes knight e5, and I probably should have just traded that off, but I went queen b5, thinking to force a trade of queens, which would make things even easier for me, and he went for the queen trade. And so now it's much simpler. I don't have to worry about all those forks with the queen and stuff. He took on f7. I did give up a pawn, but I get this pawn. And then he played f3. I go king g8, chasing his knight away. And well, let's just go through the rest of the moves. There's nothing much going on here. I'm just a piece up. I just have to be careful not to lose all of my pawns. I can lose one or two. I need to exchange off a pawn there just to open up a square for my king. I was low on space this whole game, so it was kind of interesting. It was a constant struggle to find space for my pieces. And then he walks into this pin, so that helped me out a lot. In this position, he could play knight c3, bring the knight around this way. But I have a pretty simple plan. I can place my bishop on this square. I can reposition my knight to attack his b-pawn, and I should be able to chase his king away and win one of these pawns. But anyway, yeah, knight c3. Let's just take a look at this, just out of curiosity, how the engine would proceed to make progress. Knight c4 check. King d3. So the king can't come forward, but it could go sideways. Then knight to b6. So yeah, the engine has some idea. Maybe coming around this way to challenge that knight. So the knight drops back to d1. Now bishop to c5. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So it's not directly going after these pawns. It's trying to dominate White's pieces. White can never afford to trade off that knight, so the knight's not going to go to these squares that the bishop is attacking. Knight to c3, and now maybe knight d5 challenging the knight. The knight goes back to b1. So eventually, yeah, this goes on and on and on, and I haven't even won one of those pawns, and we're several moves into this continuation. So maybe it's not so easy to directly win those pawns. So it made life much easier for me when he played knight f4, because now I can pin the knight with bishop g5, and there's no way out. After this, I'm just a piece, or two pieces up. And so he played on hoping for a stalemate or something, but just got to be a little bit careful, and it's no problem. So the game ended like that. So I mentioned in my previous video in the live commentary that I'll be away from my computer for a couple of weeks. Yeah, about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit less. So take advantage of the playlists. I have all the videos on one playlist or another, so you can use the playlist to browse the videos that are here. There won't be any new uploads for that 2 weeks that I'm gone. And yeah, using the playlist to browse the channel is good, or using the in-channel search function to search for particular openings or topics, things like that. That works pretty well too. So enjoy. Leave any comments you have. I'll still answer comments, and I will see you when I get back. Bye.